The 2025 NBA draft has officially wrapped up, and with that, the Washington Wizards had one of the more interesting classes of the draft, coming away with 3 different players with unique skill sets, potentials, and positions, thus adding 3 new pieces to the Washington Wizards' ever-developing young core. And what I want to do today is examine each player chosen, looking at their strengths, weaknesses, and fits both long and short term on this new Washington Wizards team. But before we get into that, we need to take a look at who was actually chosen by the Washington Wizards in the 2025 NBA draft. With the 6th pick, the Washington Wizards selected Tre Johnson, a guard out of Texas, and with the 21st pick, which they acquired by trading back from the 18th pick, the Washington Wizards selected forward from Illinois, Will Riley. And finishing off the draft in the 2nd round, the Washington Wizards selected Jamir Watkins, guard out of Florida State, with the 43rd pick. Starting with Tre Johnson, I feel like we need a little bit of background information here, as Tre was not always the clear-cut pick at 6. As a fan, going into the draft, I was completely expecting either Ace Bailey or Jeremiah Fears, as that had been a lot of the rumors heading up to the draft in like the week beforehand. So when Utah stunned the entire draft and took Ace Bailey at 5, I was fully expecting to take Jeremiah Fears. So when Tre's name was called, I was a bit surprised. However, pleasantly surprised, as Tre Johnson comes into the Washington Wizards with the chance to be one of the cornerstone players of this rebuild. Now, looking at some basic facts on the screen there, I first want to get into Tre Johnson's strengths and what makes him such an intriguing player at 6. The first thing that sticks out about Tre is his absolutely just nuclear 3-point shooting. He was roughly 40% on the year, shooting 7 attempts a game in one of the hardest conferences in college basketball, which really just can't be understated. He can get his shot off in really any way, whether it be off the catch, which he shot 40% on, or coming off pin downs, running off screens, which he shot an even higher clip at roughly 50% on the year. The mechanics on his shot are absolutely butter. His footwork is incredible, his release point is great, and just looking at the shot, you can tell he's a shooter. It is just a pretty jumper. A lot of Tre's immediate value in the NBA is going to come from his off-ball shooting, whether it be just the aforementioned off the catch. His range is also super deep. He can catch it from damn near the logo, pull it, and you can expect it to go in. Like I said, running off screens, silent out of bounds, pin downs, any real action that Coach Keefe can get him in, Tre is going to shoot the ball, and he's going to shoot it well. Which leads me into my next point, that even though his off-ball shooting is going to be a major strength for him in the NBA, there's a lot more to discover with the ball in his hands. His shooting off the dribble and from the pull-up was almost as impressive as his stuff off the catch, and he is just a guy that you can give the ball to on the perimeter and expect him to go get a bucket for your team. While he's not the best space creator in the world, he does have a slick handle that allows him to get just the inkling of daylight he needs to get off any shot he wants. He's got a nice step-back jumper that he likes going to a lot, as well as that he can get to the mid-range if guys begin to run him off the line. He's also good at leveraging his elite shooting to become a good passer. While I don't know if I'd characterize Tre's playmaking as an immediate strength, it's definitely not a weakness, which is kind of rare for guys of his archetype. While definitely someone who is of the score-first mentality, he's good at making a pass once that scoring read is cut off. On the year, he averaged 2.7 assists per game and 1.8 turnovers a game, which isn't great, but definitely is something to build on. Now, quickly transitioning into some of his weaknesses and what I project his first-year role to be. To me, Tre Johnson's biggest concern is his inability to put pressure on the rim and consistently finish when he does get to the rim. While I wouldn't characterize Tre as a bad athlete necessarily, he definitely doesn't have the burst to get to the rim consistently, and that's what hurts him here, as well as that when he does get there, he doesn't have the strength to consistently finish. This can lead to some pretty inefficient basketball if your shot diet is made up almost entirely just of jumpers. The good news for Tre is that he is pretty big at 6'6" and a decent athlete, so there is a runway for him to become passable. If you really lock in the weight room and just kind of trust to the Wizards development staff, you could get to a point where he just becomes passable, which would help his game out immensely. Next, I'd have to talk about Tre's defense, as Tre was not that good of a defender at Texas this season. A lot of the same issues that affect his lack of rim pressure also affect his defense. Obviously, lack of strength. It doesn't have the real burst to stay with high-level offensive players. While I thought his effort was okay, he tended to die on screens far too much, and off the ball wasn't very impactful either. Not much of a defensive playmaker, having pretty low stocks numbers across the board, and in general, just wasn't a super impactful defender. Not necessarily that he hurt his team, but he definitely wasn't helping him on that end of the floor. And I don't want to sugarcoat his defense, as he was pretty bad on that end, but he still does have good size at 6'6", to the point where you hope you can hide him a bit on the less impactful wings on that side of the floor, but you obviously do need him him to improve, which would be putting on weight in the weight room, just becoming a little bit more impactful so if he does get switched onto an action, he can hold his own. Now lastly, the situation at Texas wasn't very good. He had a coach who probably should have been fired last year, coaching for his job the entire season. Supporting cast wasn't all that great, and what that led to was a bit of hero ball on Trey's part, and thus some questionable moments with his shot selection that he'll definitely have to clean up at the NBA level. And there is a bit of a question if he can come down from that superstar high at Texas to being more of a role complementary piece in the NBA, which I don't have much concerns about, but it definitely is out there, and we will have to see how Trey adapts. Then forecasting into what I believe the rookie year will look like for Tre Johnson, I believe he'll come off the bench to start the year with guys like CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton still on the roster. I think he'll probably come off the bench in more of like an off-ball shooting role, and I don't think that's all that bad. I think learning behind Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum, those are two vets who have proven that they can do it, especially CJ, kind of in that similar archetype, doesn't get to the rim much, relies on some three-point shooting, mid-range shooting, more of a perimeter scorer. I think that can be really good for Trey, but I would expect him to come off the bench early in the year, and then once the trade deadline passes, maybe CJ and Middleton get shipped off to another team, you will see Trey probably come into that starting role and get a little bit more on-ball responsibility, which I think you can tap into and see where that takes you if he has the on-ball juice to maybe be one of your lead scorers and a key piece for the future of the Washington Wizards. Then transitioning into the Washington Wizards' second pick of the draft, Will Riley. Now, Will was a highly touted prospect out of Canada, and at the Basketball Without Borders camp in 2024, Will won MVP of the camp, putting his names firmly on draft boards. Originally a prospect in the 2025 recruiting class, he classed up a year to try to get into the league that little bit earlier. Then taking a look at Will in his freshman season at Illinois, it's kind of hard to pin down an exact skill he overly exceeded at Illinois, but just in general, his offensive feel of knowing where to be both on and off the ball, making quick moves with the ball in his hands to get to the hoop, was just really, really high level. And for lack of a better descriptor, he really just has an unteachable level of feel on the basketball court on the offensive side of the ball. Looking at Will's shooting, the numbers wouldn't suggest he was a very good shooter at Illinois. He was only about 32% from 3 on about 4 attempts a game and around 70% from the line. But coming out of high school and the international scene, he was well regarded as a pretty good shooter, and you can kind of see that when he shoots. His mechanics aren't the cleanest in the world. It's not someone like Trey's, but they're certainly good looking, and you can see that he kind of just has that shooter vibe to him. You'd look at him and you'd say that guy's a shooter, even though the numbers don't necessarily show it. So I don't know if I can necessarily call his shooting a strength just on how the jumper looks, because then a lot of guys would be a lot better shooters than they actually are. But what I do think is a strength is his shooting upside and ability to be an elite shooter at around 6'8", 6'9". I think that has very real chance, and as he continues to get rep both in the G League and the NBA, you could definitely see that shooting come to fruition. And even though Will has a really thin frame, coming in at around 170, which is really small for the NBA level, he's a surprisingly good finisher on the offensive side of the ball. And I just think that speaks to the aforementioned just feel for the game, because even though he isn't the strongest, he's not the biggest, he has that wherewithal and just that feel to know where to be to make layups that he probably shouldn't be able to make. And then lastly, sporting a positive assist to turnover ratio at 2.2 assists per game and only 1.2 turnovers per game, again, just speaks to his overall feel. Even though he's not a high level playmaker, someone you can give the ball to and have them make a play for another guy, if he has to do a swing, get the ball to somebody who's open, he can definitely do that and kind of has that connective feel to him. Then looking at Will's weaknesses and what I project his first year role to be, I just want to touch on the shooting part really quick. As I mentioned in the strength part, talking about his shooting, he definitely has upside to be a good shooter, but he's going to have to act on it. You see plenty of guys in the NBA who have good looking jumpers and they should be good shooters, but they're just not. So if he can't act on that and become more consistent as a shooter, the game isn't really going to come around to him. Then transitioning into Will's defense, there's really not much to sugarcoat here. Will was like an all-time bad defender at Illinois, and this isn't me being hyperbolic. Just to put it in perspective, Will Riley is the first player with a steal rate lower than 0.6 to be drafted since 2008, which is honestly just insane. It all really starts with this frame. He's far too weak and thin to keep guys in front of him, and once they get downhill, they can really just push him out of the way where he's no concern at all. He also has a tendency to just stand straight up. Because he is pretty tall at 6'9", he doesn't get into a stance, and that's another part of why guys can just kind of blow by him, and he isn't much of a factor on the defensive side of the ball. He's also one of the 1 or 2 guys to have a negative wingspan with shoes on, so he's 6'9" with shoes, and he only has like a 6'8" and 3/4 wingspan, which doesn't help him get any stocks. Like I mentioned, the steal rate's really low, the block rate's really low, only 0.6 stocks on the year, which is just really inexcusable. And just being a defensive playmaker, he's not very disruptive. He's going to get hunted on that side of the ball, and the defense is just a real major concern. And I touched on it with the defense, but his frame is definitely an issue, and there's some things he can't really change. Like his wingspan isn't just going to magically grow over the next couple years, but he can't consistently stay in the weight room and trying to put weight on, and hopefully just get to a point where his frame is more filled out just to help him on the defensive side of the ball with his finishing, etc. Then kind of tying it all up here, while I do like Will's offensive game a ton, the defense really scares me, and honestly, the best option for him is probably just going to be below average and having the offense be good enough to where you can sacrifice being a man down on defense almost. That said, projecting his role in year one, I would expect him to be the first guy in the Michael Winger, Will Dawkins tenure to kind of spend the majority of his time in the G League. Just with all the guys on the roster kind of in that wing forward spot like Champagny, Bilal, Keyshawn, even a Middleton still there, Corey Kispert, I think his time will just be better spent in the G League, and I don't mean that as a negative. I think that can be good for him. Getting more consistent with the shot, putting on the needed weight to survive in the NBA is going to be a big step for Will to take. So to sum it up, I think I'll spend a lot of the time in the G League, especially early season, just kind of working on those rudimentary things, getting his weight up, working on the jumper, and then maybe after the deadline, when some more minutes have been presumably opened up, he can slide in there and get reps with the main team. Then looking at the Wizards' last pick of the night in Jamir Watkins, who they selected at the 43rd pick. Coming out of high school, Jamir Watkins committed to VCU, and in his first season at VCU as a freshman, he was really productive, but going into his second year, he tore his ACL, missing the entire season. He would come back for a successful sophomore year before transferring to Florida State, where he would finish out his 2 years left of eligibility. So 5 years in total for Jamir Watkins, which is going to make him 24 years old on opening day. Now, I say all that to say that it's a bit significant that Jamir is this old. In 7 straight picks in the post-Beal rebuild era, they haven't picked somebody younger than 21 once, let alone someone at 24 years old. So when I talk about Trey needing to get better at this and Will needing to get better at that, all that sort of developmental stuff doesn't necessarily apply to Jamir, being that he is so old and kind of just is who he is at this point. But that doesn't mean Jamir can't be an impact player for us, as he does have a lot of skills that I think are going to help him be a super productive player at the NBA level. And the first skill that I think will really pop for Jamir is just his defense. He's got great size as around 6'6", with a 6'11" wingspan, and one of the pluses of coming in as an older player means he's already going to have that NBA ready build, as he's already kind of physically developed in that way, which helps him keep guys in front of him. He's got good hands, and he can really just muck up stuff on the defensive side of the ball, which gives him a skill that'll gonna make him playable almost right away. He's also really strong as a defensive playmaker. He averaged 1.7 stocks on the year, with 1.2 of those being steals, and in the NBA Combine, he actually had a game with 6 steals, which is just pretty remarkable considering like everyone's kind of playing for their lives in those games, so getting 6 steals is a really good thing to see, which provides a nice transition into his next skill, being someone who really can push the tempo in transition, whether it be getting off a steal or a block, that defensive playmaking, getting out and going, or just grabbing a board and pushing the pace. He's someone that really likes to get down the court fast and make a play for himself, for others, so his transition play is definitely also a strength for Jamir Watkins. He's also someone that can really put pressure on the rim. Now, finishing at the rim is something I'm going to talk about in the weaknesses section, but he definitely can get to the rim really well. And on the year, he's someone who has a 98 percentile free throw rate, so he can really get to the rim and then get to the line as a product of that. He had a 2-game stretch where he shot 40 free throws in 2 games, which really just speaks to his ability to just kind of like throw himself at the rim. Even if the results aren't necessarily there finishing wise, he's going to draw fouls, which is objectively a positive, even if it's not coming in the most orthodox way. Then looking at the weaknesses for Jamir Watkins, the 2 things that I really point out are going to be the rim finishing and the shooting. Jamir's just never really been that good of a shooter in college. He's always kind of just had around that low 30s mark, high 20s. In the first 3 years of college, he was only putting up like 3 a game, and in his senior year, he did put up 5 a game, upping that volume a little bit, which helps you believe in the shot a little bit more, and it doesn't look bad technically, but he's just going to have to become a better shooter at the NBA level if he really wants to stick. And as I mentioned earlier, although Jamir does get to the rim with regularity and he's really good at getting to the line, the conversion rate at the rim just hasn't been all that high. For his at-rim attempts, he shot 61.4%, which doesn't sound terrible, but it's only around 34 percentile, which isn't great for a guy who's getting there as much as he is, so he's definitely going to have to clean that up a little bit, again, if he wants to stick in the league with his skill set. So I think the sell for Jamir at the NBA level is honestly pretty clear to see. He's a guy who defends well, he gets to the rim, he gets to the line with regularity, he's someone who's a good passer, and he gives you that baseline level of confidence where you hope he can become a better shooter and someone who can finish better at the rim. But he kind of falls into that category of being a guy who's kind of a jack of all tradesman master of none. And I think that can go one of two ways. You either have a guy who can really stick in the league as a do-it-all wing, who can really find his niche being a shooter or a defender, or you have a guy who's really just never going to find his true skill and is going to fade out of the league because of it. So I think it can go one or two ways. And for Jamir's role this season, he's going to start out in the G League as someone who's going to be on a two-way contract. That's just kind of where you start. But I think his reps and his career is going to be in his hands. He's going to have a chance and a runway to play a lot and play well. And if he does, he's going to move up the ranks of the Washington Wizards and can become someone who is a true role player at this NBA level. But yeah, that's kind of just the breakdown of the Washington Wizards 2025 NBA draft class. I think they got a good little bunch. You know, I'm biased a little bit being a Washington Wizards fan. I think the consensus media would say we didn't have a bad draft, we didn't have a good draft, but I think the process in this draft was very good. And I think you can have a draft, you look back in 5 years and say, wow, they had 3 good players in this draft, you know, and I think that's something really positive for the team. But yeah, that is going to be the video. If you liked what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. If you're familiar with the channel, you know I'll put out really good Wizard stuff. Had a little bit of a hiatus there, had to lock in on school a little bit, but I'm back now. I don't plan to stop anytime soon. But yeah, I'll definitely have some new stuff for this summer league coming up, international basketball stuff that's happening, you know. So if you're a basketball head, Wizards fan, just anyone who likes basketball, just subscribe.